YouTube, what is good? We're back again with another hair tutorial. On this one, we're going to be performing a mid-drop fade. Not a mid-fade, no, not a low fade, but a mid-drop fade. So what is a drop fade? A drop fade is actually, just to keep it as simple as possible, a mid-fade around the side of the head, and once you get to the back, you're going to drop it down to a lower fade. So I'm going to show you guys how to set that up and properly execute on that cut. Now, because of the shape of dropping the fade down, you are going to have to angle the clippers a certain way to kind of cut the hair. I'm gonna also explain that as well. But first, start off, of course, we're gonna bald them out. And these are my Wall Retro trimmers, the wireless ones from Wall. Love these trimmers to take down baldness. I'm just gonna start, like I said, just like a mid fade on that sideburn. And kind of take it around the ear as I would a mid fade. Once I get around to that back part behind the ear, I'm gonna start dropping it like a C, almost, or just like it just dropping off a cliff, and go right down below, more towards the neck. Now you're gonna see around that sideburn area, there is a lot more hair around that seat cup, and I made sure not to take up that baldness too high and kind of arch it up more. And that's just to really ensure that around that lineup, when I do go and line it up towards the end, all that shit is nice and dark. I don't want to take it up too high and then have to replace it with hair fibers just to give it that darker look. I don't want my client going home and washing his haircut off, and then he realizes that I did not keep that sideburn area darker. And then when I do add on the hair fibers afterward, just give that extra little pop. It just makes it look real nice. Now, like I said, in the back, you want to drop it like you would a low fade, probably as low as possible. When you're starting out with these, you might want to kind of experiment with how low you go on some clients' heads. Some clients, you know, they look better if you take that bald line super low. Some just like kind of like a mid-low fade. Really experiment, and also it depends on like the type of haircut they get on top. My client is only taking the top down to a 2, so I can actually bring that baldness up a little bit higher than I normally would. And then I'm just gonna go over the top of his head with a 2-guard, like I said before. Make sure everything's all evened out. Now, this side profile that we're going to be seeing while I'm taking down his hair is going to be a good representation of how far down I'm going to take it. You can see his occipital bone right there, and you can actually see how far down lower on this head I took the guideline around the occipital bone. When you do a mid fade, you want to take that line right up underneath that occipital bone, and then a low fade, you want to go generally, I usually take it at least generally lower than occipital bone, just to keep the fade as low as possible. And you can see that it's gonna create, you're gonna have to go with the flow with the hair growth when you are cutting this, because it is a little bit of an unnatural angle to be cutting the hair at. Next, I'm just gonna be taking my 0-guard close on my Andis Fade Masters and working with that arch. I'm gonna be, throughout this whole haircut, working with that arch and that angle that I created, making sure that I don't really push up or make that line too unnatural. I want to keep that shape that I created at first as much as I can throughout the whole haircut, because that's what's gonna give that drop fade, that drop illusion. Then, of course, just taking my Andis foil shavers, balding him up all the way out, making sure I'm taking down the hair as close as possible to the head, and also leaving about a ½ inch of stubble right before that guideline, just to make sure I can make that balding out process as smooth as possible. Next, I'm just going to be using my Andis Fade Masters to knock out that next guideline. I'm going to start with them close first, going about 1/4 inch up each time, close halfway open, fading all the way up, and then I'm just going to be working my way down, playing with that clipper back and forth as need be, take out any dark spots that I do see. Now, I'm still, of course, staying with that shape and overall structure of the drop, making sure I don't push up anywhere too high, just to keep, just like I said, just keep that drop intact. Next, I'm gonna go with a 0-guard all the way open on my Andis Fade Masters, just to create my next guideline. Well, first of all, I actually forgot to take out that next little part with my ostrich speed lines. So like when I do be cutting, you know, I do skip steps and then like realize halfway through, like, oh shit, I need to do this before I move on to that. That's completely fine. It's not, you know, that's just how I cut. I like to go at it with my speed lines all the way open, work my way down before I make that 0-guard transition, just because it makes it a lot more smoother. when I am fading out from a closed zero. And I do work my way all the way closed on these clippers. Sometimes I'll go like a little bit before the closed notch, just because all that's usually faded out with the Fade Masters, but that's really also just to clean up any darker spots that I'm seeing. It's a different clipper, it's a different type of blend that the speed lines kind of give me, so I always like to mix it up and hit the hair with certain clippers and different clippers. Sometimes you might get better results with a different clipper. His hair texture is very, very thick and dark, so the fade sometimes kind of gets real condensed. If I try to do like a real sharp and condensed fade on him, it's just not gonna look right. His hair is too dark and too thick for that fade to come out looking real nice. So I try to elongate the fade as much as possible, and definitely hitting it with different clippers helps a lot. So now finally I'm going to go at it with a zero guard all the way open, working my way about 3/4 inch, making my next guideline. After that, close that thing all the way up and then start fading up from closed halfway to open. And then I'm just going to be taking out any darker spots that I do see, playing with that lever. Now, once you start working your way up to longer clippers that make the hair a little bit darker, you really want to be able to be focused on that occipital bone in the back. I try to keep as much darkness, or really like when you do a drop fade, you want to keep the darkness transition right around that occipital bone. You don't want to take that fade up any higher than the occipital bone, or really have it any lower than that. That's really generally like that sweet spot to have the transition faded from like the fade to the darker part of the head. As you can kind of see that created right now. Then just for cleanup purposes, I'm just going to use my Oster speed lines again, open them all the way up, and then any darker spots that I see from the close to the no guard transition, just kind of clean that up. And then literally just repeat the same steps on the other side of the head. Now, when I am fading, I'm not really listening for the hair to be cutting. I'm comfortable enough now to know how short to go in certain areas, or to recognize what areas I need to be going shorter in. I'm really looking for the result, and what result that open or closed guard gives me. So I'm not really trying to listen for the hair cutting. Usually when you're starting off, you want to be able to make sure that you hear hair cutting, because you're not really sure of, okay, does the open guard take this area down the way I want it to, or does a closed guard? I don't really know if it's doing anything. So that's when you want to be able to be listening for the hair. What I've noticed recently is, because I've been really just throwing in headphones when I'm cutting and doing these hair tutorials, just so I can focus in more and not be distracted from any outside sources. But I'm really just honed in on like the result and what I see with my eyes instead of what I see with my ears, or hear with my ears. Actually, you can't really see with your ears, but you know what I'm saying. But I'm really just focused on I'm just focused on what, after each stroke, what the clipper gives me and what the hair is giving me, and then work my way off that. I'm not really like, all right, I hear it cutting, it's gonna turn out good if it's cutting. Like, I'm literally, as I'm cutting, looking at every single stroke afterwards, and working that area. After you finish all that out, I'm going to take my one guard, open it all the way up. I'm not going all the way to the top of the head. I'm just going to be taking up another 3/4 inch up, flicking out as well, because we're getting towards the end of the fade. And then from here, I'm just going to be working down from open halfway to closed. Now, on my client's head, this is the hardest part of the transition since I've been cutting him up, just because, like I said before, his hair is so dark and the contrast of his head is so much lighter that if I don't stretch out this fade or really focus on this darker part of the hair to really fade it out really well, it's just gonna look too choppy and look too like there's a harsh line. Sometimes with clients and their hair textures, you're gonna come across that, like, it's a simple ass cut, right? A 2 on top drop fade. Like, I think most barbers can do that, and in their heads, like, shit, that's an easy ass fade. But this is actually one of my more time consuming cuts, just because of how much time I do spend on this part of the blend. And you are gonna get some of those cuts like that. It's completely fine to take your time. Don't feel like, damn, am I that bad of a barber to where, like, I can't even do this? I've thought that before. I'm like, damn, I might just not be that good of a barber if I'm taking this long on a simple fade like this. But a lot of the times, the simple fades will be like some of the hardest fades, just because of how much detailed work you have to go into it. Also, after I finish blending out with this one guard, I do take my zero guard all the way open, and same thing like I did with after I finished my zero guard blend and took my Oster speed lines and kind of took out any darker spots. That's what I'm gonna do with the zero guard open on this one transition, and really just take out any darker spots that I see and make sure that transition from zero guard open to one guard close is as smooth as possible. And then my final step, I do take that 2 guard on the side just to make sure everything is nice and rounded off. Sometimes when you do go over the top of the head at first, you miss some hairs on that side part of the head. So I just make sure I go over it to make sure everything is just all nice and smooth. Then I think I do go back over it with my 1 guard. I think I did, I just didn't capture it. I went straight into bald, getting that bald line out. But I think I went over it with a 1 guard open just to kind of make sure that transition is smooth as well. Then take the end of shavers and press down on that line very, very lightly. I don't want to be making too hard of a line, but just trying to erase that last little bit of stubble. And then I'm gonna be going around that C cup like I talked about earlier, making that line. As you can see, it was left a little bit darker. That was just because of how I set it up at first. And that was kind of what I was talking about in the earlier beginning of the video, of how I wanted that darker outline around that C cup of the sideburn area. Still just cleaning up anything that I see of darker areas or darker spots of any transition, and simply repeating the same steps that I did on the left side of the head, on the right side of the head. Now we're gonna move on to the lineups. First, spritz down that front hairline, and then I'm gonna take a brush, kind of make sure all the hair is brushed downward, all evened out. Now I'm gonna go ahead and start from the center of the head, work my way. I believe I worked my way to the left side of the head first, just because that is the lighter part of his hairline. That's a part of the hairline that's kind of angled back a little bit more, so I want to start off there first. I do want to keep it as natural as possible, but still make it as crisp as possible at the same time. I know it sounds a little bit weird, but you don't want to be taking that line, or if he doesn't have that perfect line, pushing his shit back and trying to attempt to make his shit perfect. If their lineup is not perfect, try to go as natural as possible, but as crisp as possible as well. And then just mirroring that same line on the other side of the head as well. You're gonna see me right there go ahead and checking in the mirror in between to make sure both sides are evened out. Anything that I do see that needs to be evened out or brought up just a little bit, I'm gonna go ahead and do that. Now I'm gonna go ahead and apply my hair fibers, just a nice light layer of hair fibers. I don't like to go too dark when applying these hair fibers. I don't like too unnatural. I just like that natural look. When my clients leave, they don't look like they just got some Sharpie or anything on their heads. When you are applying hair fibers, make sure you do press down on that top nice and lightly. And then I'm just gonna take my trimmers and hit that lineup over again where the hair fibers were laid down, just to ensure that line is super, super crisp. Now I'm just gonna go ahead and straight razor him up, pulling the skin in the opposite direction, taking the blade as close to the line as possible without pushing the hair fibers back or pushing his hairline back. Really just getting a nice outline and taking down those hairs. When I'm going around that arch around the sideburn area, make sure I tilt his head back and keep the angle of the blade consistent. Otherwise, if you make it too sharp against the head, you are gonna cut him. Around that sideburn area is like where a lot of cuts happen for beginners, so just make sure you're paying attention to what angle the blade is laying down on his head. I only highlight that because I recently cut Dunn up. Well, I didn't cut him up, but I barely nicked him around that area when I was lining up his beard. And he pointed that out to me, that my angle of the blade around that area was not a good angle. So I've been really trying to pay attention to that shit when I'm doing my clients. So just want to pass the information along to y'all. Then of course, when I finish the hairline with the razor line, I like to go behind the ear and a little bit behind the fade, just take down any hair stubble that the trimmers or shavers did not pick up, just to make sure that baldness pops a little bit more. I'm gonna re-hit those fibers with the spritz to make sure they stay in there, and then I'm gonna go ahead and do a little bit of clipper over texturizing comb. Clipper over texturizing shears. This is just to kind of get that little bit of darker line out that I see. I'm not trying to go in too hard with them. I'm just going over nice and lightly any darker spots I see, just to make sure that fade is a little bit smoother. It's just a nice little technique, nice little finisher that I like to finish off fades. It just makes it gives it that nice little smoother transition on it. Then I go ahead, clean them up, dust them off, clean up any neck hairs as well to make sure that I don't leave any of those neck hairs on my client. And that is the finish of the drop fade. As you can see, right behind that occipital bone right there, it still stays dark. Kept the angle like I did when I first set it up. And that's how you perform a drop fade. So make sure you guys always are aware of how you set up that angle. Stay consistent with that throughout the cut, and I'm sure you guys will have the most barred up drop fades out there. Appreciate y'all for watching this video. Next video will be coming out very, very shortly.